We are all Satoshi.
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 We are all Satoshi. We are all Satoshi.
And with that, I welcome you back to another video here on the channel. In this one, we explore the question of who Satoshi Nakamoto is, the pseudonymous creator of Bitcoin. Before we get to the most likely candidates, what exactly did Satoshi solve? Why does it matter that no one knows who he is? And why was it one of his greatest decisions that he actually left the project? Satoshi Nakamoto is a Japanese-sounding pseudonym of the creator of Bitcoin. We don't know if he's a man, if she's a woman, or if they are a group. What Satoshi did is that he found a solution to the double spending problem, also known as the Byzantine generals problem. Roughly speaking, the problem is about different parties needing to find consensus or a strategy to move forward to avoid complete failure. However, some of the parties can be either corrupt or create false information. Bitcoin uses proof of work and the blockchain to agree on a single truth. It's actually quite fascinating that Satoshi chose to be pseudonymous from the very moment he started sharing information about Bitcoin. His predecessors that worked on digital cash all appeared with their real name. And this pseudonymity is one of the most genius strikes of Satoshi. It primarily guarantees two things. One, the neutrality of the protocol. And two, reducing attack vectors, because no government, corporation or individual can attack Satoshi or put him into jail. You can see how much the neutrality of Bitcoin mattered to Satoshi when you read his writings. Bitcoin was designed to be protected from the influence of charismatic leaders, even if their name is Gavin Andresen, Barack Obama or Satoshi Nakamoto. This is also why it's one of the boldest moves of Satoshi that he left the project early on and let it develop by the open source community. He was not the leader of it. He also never claimed the rewards of his 1 million Bitcoin that he mined early on, and to be honest, I believe this is how he always planned it. The first person that helped Satoshi with the implementation of Bitcoin, and thereby is also our first candidate for this list, was Hal Finney. As all the following candidates, Hal was a cypherpunk and deeply interested in electronic, censorship-resistant cash. The first ever Bitcoin transaction was between Satoshi and Hal Finney. Well, maybe it actually was between Hal Finney and Hal Finney. Hal left the project shortly after Satoshi did. He died as a result of complications with ALS and was cryopreserved. His foresight about Bitcoin was unbelievable though. Whether it's second layer applications or his ultimate price prediction of $10 million per Bitcoin only days after Bitcoin was created and had a value of 0. One thing that is a bit strange to me is that Hal registered on the Bitcoin Talk forum a year after he started working on Bitcoin. If you're so enthusiastic about something, how are you not part of the forum from the very start? Maybe he read and answered everything through his other account, called Satoshi. Another often named contestant is Adam Back. He's the creator of Hashcash, which builds the foundation for Bitcoin mining. Adam also confirmed that he was probably the first person Satoshi talked to about Bitcoin in 2008, but he didn't really enter the scene for the first years. Unlike Hal Finney and others, although Satoshi sent me the software before the official release, I didn't start running it at the very beginning. Shortly after its release, Hal tried using Bitcoin and wrote a summary of how it worked on the mailing list, and after that I went back to analyzing Bitcoin. I think that's a bit odd. I'll just give you Charles Hoskinson's explanation of why he thinks Adam Back is Satoshi. Charles Hoskinson is the creator of Cardano and was invited to the Fridman podcast.
The most likely candidate would be Adam Back. It's the Occam's razor candidate, and mostly because he's the right place, right time, right age, right skill set. You know, if you look at the design of Bitcoin, the types of decisions, like the use of Forth, the scripting language, it was pretty common in English and European pedagogy in the 1980s and 1990s as like an example language for a stack-based assembly. And like little stuff like that, little quirks like that. Also, he created Hashcash, which was the predecessor of proof of work. And he just kind of got a chip on his shoulder that Microsoft never did anything with it. So he's probably looking for something. He grew up with all the cypherpunks. He knew of Hal Finney. You know, he knew of all these people. He knew Phil Zimmerman.
Hal Finney.
Well, no, because the code was not good enough. Hal was a Unix, Linux guy. He was a talented programmer. He was a talented developer. The initial code for Bitcoin was developed, it looked like on a Windows machine. Adam worked at Microsoft, go figure. And also it was very academic and it had to be cleaned up and a lot of things had to be patched up and fixed. If a guy like Hal developed it, they probably had less of the, let's use SecP256K1 and these types of things, and more of like, hey, let's build this cool engineering thing and we'll figure out the protocol design later on. it just stinks of an older academic, the initial design of Bitcoin and the initial rollout of Bitcoin. And then brilliant people like Greg Maxwell and others, they came and cleaned it all up. And lo and behold, where's Adam? He's like the CEO of the largest Bitcoin development company in the space, who's trying to keep working on and building out Bitcoin. And where the hell was Adam when Satoshi was around? I don't think there was any overlap where they were both together at the same period of time. But I mean, if you really care, you can, you could even do this. There's a lovely paper written by the U.S. Army. If you just Google like code stellometry, U.S. Army, it's a technique where you can use ML and a few other things to actually kind of develop a fingerprint for the way that people write code. So all you got to do is take the original Bitcoin source code and then take all the open source repos from around that time period and before and see if there's a match between those two. Now, if he's really good at creating an alias, probably not so good at obfuscating the code that was written. So the odds are that you'd probably find a match to a repo that's connected to a real-life human identity. And I think it matches closest to Szabo if you actually do the written stellometry analysis of Satoshi's writings to Szabo's
So I meant stellometry as a field. I didn't actually look for application for this particular problem. But so you're saying Szabo is the closest match?
Well, yeah, somebody did it years. I didn't look at if the model was sound or not, but I just remember reading on a Bitcoin talk. And Szabo is another one of the common candidates. Hal Finney, Szabo, and Adam are probably the top three.
And this directly brings us to our next candidate, Szabo, whose writing style is closest to that of Satoshi. Szabo is a polymath genius, to say the least, who can combine many parts into a whole, which was a prerequisite to invent Bitcoin. He's the inventor of BitGold, which is a predecessor to Bitcoin but was never developed, and characterized the term smart contract in, and yes, this is the right year, 1993. His paper Building Blocks for Digital Markets in 1996 explains many things Bitcoin later on does. Something that is interesting is that Satoshi explained how Bitcoin's base are the ideas of Wydai's B-Money and Szabo's BitGold. However, in the Bitcoin white paper, you won't find Szabo's name among the references. And it goes even further than the white paper. All Bitcoin relevant cypherpunks had email exchanges with Satoshi. Guess who didn't? Szabo. Just like Adam Back, he was also not active in the Bitcoin Talk forum for years, even though it's his BitGold idea with some adjustments turned into reality. That again is very odd to me. By the way, Szabo has Hungarian roots. In Hungary, just like in Japan, it's common to say the second name first. Szabo becomes Szabo Nick. In the Genesis block, the initials read NS, which would be more typically referring to Szabo. The fourth nominee is the Belgian Len Sassaman, and this is a name that most of you probably haven't heard of before in the context of who Satoshi is. Evan Hatch published a Medium post called Len Sassaman and Satoshi, a Cypherpunk history, that gives many indications that Len Sassaman was Satoshi. Len was a brilliant cypherpunk, researched peer-to-peer networks and blockchain technology, and was close to many of the cypherpunks that were involved in the early days of Bitcoin. By all accounts, Len was on track to be one of the most important cryptographers of his time, but on July 3, 2011, he tragically took his own life at 31, following a long battle with depression and functional neurological disorders. 2 months before Len's death, Satoshi sent his last message. "I've moved on to other things, and probably won't be around in the future." Len's interests were exactly the ones that would lead someone to create Bitcoin. He was freedom-seeking, distrusting authorities, part of the Cypherpunk mailing list, and working on the technologies that enabled Bitcoin. Early in his career, Len distinguished himself as an authority in public key cryptography, the foundation of Bitcoin. By 22, he was presenting at conferences and had founded a public key crypto startup with famous open source activist Bruce Perens. And guess what? He worked on PGP alongside Hal Finney, the first contributor to Bitcoin after Satoshi. Len Sassaman seemed to be at the right place at the right time to be Satoshi. Len's PhD advisor at COSIC was none other than the father of digital currency, David Chaum. While Chaum led the groundwork for the entire cypherpunk movement and all cryptocurrencies, few could claim to have worked with him directly. But what I find most interesting is what Len worked on afterwards. Remember which problems Satoshi solved in order to make Bitcoin a reality? As work on the Pynchon gave progress, Len became increasingly focused on finding solutions for the Byzantine fault, also known as Byzantine generals problem, that had been a major obstacle for earlier peer-to-peer networks. Satoshi's most important innovation was a triple-entry accounting system that solved this using the blockchain introduced by Chaum. There are also many hints that suggest Satoshi was in fact European and not American. He used the day, month, year, date format, referred to euros, his time zone didn't seem American, and he added the Chancellor on brink of second bailout headline to the Genesis blog, which was specific to the European version of the Times. His English was also more British than American, and Len used the same terms on his private Twitter. But speaking of Twitter, one thing that speaks against him being Satoshi is that he started tweeting about Bitcoin a few times in 2010 and 2011. He seemed to be quite skeptical, to the degree of being against it. But maybe that's just OPSEC, who knows. Another name you will always see in this context is Craig Wright, the self-proclaimed Satoshi. It doesn't really add up though, as he had several gaps in his knowledge about Bitcoin when talking about it, and also gave no proof that he is Satoshi, which he could have easily done through a digital signature from one of Satoshi's addresses. Instead, he wrote a long mumbo-jumbo blog post explaining why he is Satoshi. So he is not included in my list of the most likely Satoshi candidates. Hal Finney, Adam Back, Nick Szabo, Len Sassaman. All of them are brilliant minds, and it is tragic that two of them already died. I don't know if any of them really are Satoshi. There are many other names floating around, but I found none of them as compelling as the list that I made. What do you think who Satoshi is? The good thing is that we don't need to know, and that it's actually better for the project that none of us knows. And that's it for this video. I hope you found it interesting and also took something out of it. If you did, I would appreciate it if you leave a like and subscribe to the channel for further content. And then I see you next time.